The silent landing. The night sky over the coastal city was dark and restless. Low clouds glowed faint blue from the lights of the towers below. The wind moved through broken wires and empty docks, carrying a soft electric hum far above the harbor. A dark shape cut through the clouds without making a sound. It was not a plane, and it was not made by any human hands. The shape slowed, tilted, and descended like a shadow, landing on the abandoned airstrip near the old docks. For a moment everything stayed perfectly still. Then the belly of the craft opened like a quiet breath, and a silver ramp slid down to the cracked concrete. A faint violet light spilled across broken crates and rusted beams, touching the wet ground with an otherworldly glow. A lone figure stepped out, tall and graceful, wrapped in a long black coat that moved gently in the cold air. Her hair was dark as twilight and framed a pale face that glowed softly from within. This was Princess Lyra of the Orion Star Realms, returning to Earth without guards, without banners, and without a single announcement. Only the distant sea and silent stars knew she had arrived. Lyra paused at the edge of the ramp and looked across the sleeping city. Countless small lights sparkled on the ground like a reversed sky. She drew a slow breath and felt Earth's dry air settle on her skin. Many years had passed since she last stood here, but every shadow and scent felt strangely familiar. Her guards had begged her to bring a royal escort, warning her that it was dangerous, but Lyra had refused, telling them this was something she must do on her own. The ramp folded behind her with a soft hiss, and the ship lifted quietly into the sky until it disappeared into the clouds. She was alone now, standing on cracked concrete under a foreign sky. Her heart beat steadily, a rhythm mixed with memory and purpose. She began to walk through the empty dockyard, her boots echoing against the old pavement. The night wrapped around her like a dark ocean. She had been a child the last time she set foot here, a frightened girl lost in a war she barely understood. That night she had almost died in the wreckage of a burning ship. But a human boy had found her, pulled her from the fire, and carried her to safety. His name was Ethan. She whispered his name softly as she moved toward the city lights. The memory was bright and clear, the smell of smoke, the sting of dust, the warmth of his hands holding her. She remembered his eyes the most. Calm and steady in the middle of chaos, she had promised herself that one day she would find him again. No matter how many years passed, the wind picked up near the edge of the harbor, pushing at her coat and sending the smell of salt through the air. She climbed a short ridge and stood high above the city. From there, the city stretched wide like a field of stars turned upside down. Somewhere among those lights lived the human who had once saved her life. Lyra closed her eyes and listened to the heartbeat of the city. She could hear distant sirens, the hum of moving trains, and the faint crackle of streetlights. But beneath all of it, she felt something else. A thin thread pulling her toward her destination, a promise she had carried inside her for years. When she opened her eyes again, the violet glow in her pupils shone faintly in the dark. Her senses caught something unusual. Like static before a storm, someone was watching. Perhaps the Royal Council had sent agents to follow her, or perhaps enemies of her family had sensed her arrival. Either way, danger had already begun to move in the shadows. She tightened the belt of her coat and walked down the ridge with silent determination. Her figure blended into the city's narrow streets. Neon signs flickered above her like artificial constellations. Small drones zipped across the rooftops like glowing insects. Lyra kept her hood low, passing through alleys and quiet roads. Humans walked by without noticing, but a few glanced twice, drawn by the faint violet shimmer in her eyes. She reached a quiet corner near the harbor and paused beside a row of broken lampposts. Her hand tapped a small bracelet on her wrist. A blue screen appeared in the air, showing maps, old records, and fragments of data. She traced a blinking point on the map. The crash site from years ago, her search would begin there. In the place where their lives had crossed, the screen disappeared, leaving only darkness and the low hum of the city. Lyra stood still for a moment, letting the night air fill her lungs. Her heart carried both courage and fear. She had crossed galaxies to be here, not as a child in danger, but as a princess with a promise to keep. She whispered into the wind, "I will find you, Ethan." Then she stepped forward, unaware that in a nearby alley, a pair of cold mechanical eyes watched her every move and silently transmitted a signal into the night sky. The silent landing was over. The hunt had begun. The hunt for a ghost. The first light of dawn spread across the city like a soft veil. Thin mist rolled through the streets, wrapping everything in pale silver. Princess Lyra walked with her hood low, blending into the quiet rhythm of the early morning. The world around her had changed. but deep inside she still followed a single thread, the memory of Ethan's steady eyes and the promise she made to herself long ago. She reached the edge of the old harbor where her ship had landed. Hidden behind containers and silent cranes, the wind carried the smell of salt and metal, the same scent that lingered on the night she had fallen to this world. Lyra tapped her bracelet and projected a blue holographic screen. Old archives appeared filled with dusty headlines and faded photographs. One news clip caught her eye. Mysterious fireball over seaside town. Teenager helps contain blaze. The image was blurry, but the shape of the boy in the background made her heart tighten. Tall, lean, standing near the firefighters, his face partly turned. She enlarged the photo and traced the jawline with her finger. The memory of his face burned in her mind more clearly than any picture. She whispered, "Ethan," as if calling to a ghost that might answer. The system gave no full name, no address, only fragments. Still, for her, it was enough to begin. She moved through narrow streets that led from the harbor to the older parts of the city. The buildings here were low and worn, their walls painted with time and smoke. She entered a small cafe at the corner of a quiet street, the kind of place where memories like to hide. The smell of roasted beans mixed with sea air, creating a warm but lonely atmosphere. An older woman stood behind the counter wiping mugs. Lyra approached slowly, her voice careful. "Excuse me, do you know someone named Ethan? A boy who worked with machines many years ago?" The woman frowned, searching through her memory like flipping through old pages. "Ethan," she said slowly. "There were a few, tall, dark hair kind boy. Good with repairs?" Lyra's heart lifted. "Yes, that's him," she replied softly. The woman nodded. "It's been years, maybe 10. He left for the inner city working with tech, I think. No one here's seen him since." Lyra thanked her and stepped outside. The morning sun had broken through the mist, painting the streets in pale gold. She stared toward the inner city skyline, towers of silver and glass rising like blades. Somewhere inside that maze, Ethan was living a life far from the night they shared. But Lyra was not alone as she walked away from the cafe. She caught a flicker of movement in the reflection of a window. 2 figures in plain jackets stood across the street pretending to look at a street map. Their faces were half hidden by dark visors that glowed faint blue. When she moved, they moved. When she stopped, they paused. Her heart beat faster, but her steps stayed steady. She turned into a narrow alley lined with pipes and steam vents. The air grew warm and damp. Perfect for disappearing, Lyra quickened her pace, turning corners with quiet precision. The soft echo of footsteps followed. Steady and trained, not random, she reached a dead end, the walls tight around her like a trap. The 2 figures entered from the alley's mouth, their movements smooth, professional. Lyra pulled her hood back slowly, violet light glimmering in her eyes. "This is not your path," she said calmly. Her hand sliding toward the control on her wrist, they didn't answer. Instead, they raised sleek devices that hummed with strange energy. With one sharp motion, Lyra pressed her bracelet. A thin energy shield flickered around her like moonlight. The first shot hit the shield and spread like liquid light. She spun sideways, grabbed a loose pipe from the wall and threw it, distracting one of the attackers. Then she leapt up the side of a metal crate, flipped over them, and disappeared into the maze of back streets. Her breath was steady, her heart racing not from fear but from focus. She moved through shadow after shadow until the sound of footsteps faded. Somewhere above, a small drone hovered silently, watching her vanish like smoke. By noon, Lyra had reached the outer edges of the inner city. The air here buzzed with noise and movement. Tall towers pierced the clouds, their glass faces reflecting endless streams of hover traffic. Vendors shouted, drones zipped between buildings, and screens flashed bright advertisements on every corner. Lyra walked through it all like a ghost from another world. She entered workshops, asked mechanics, traced names through old directories, but every lead slipped through her fingers. One Ethan was a chef, another was a pilot on a distant colony. None matched the boy she remembered. Each failed lead pressed heavier on her chest, but her resolve stayed unbroken. Late in the afternoon, she reached a narrow street filled with converted factory buildings. The air smelled of hot metal and oil. An elderly mechanic worked outside, fixing a floating bike with sparks flying around him. Lyra approached. "I'm looking for someone," she said. "His name is Ethan. He works with machines." The man lifted his goggles and gave a small, knowing smile. "Tall fellow, dark hair, quiet. Yes, I know him," he said. "He fixes the city's drones when no one else can. Rents a room 2 streets over. B. Hope flared inside her like a sudden flame. She thanked the man and hurried down the narrow street as evening shadows grew long. The building she found was old and metal, its walls painted with years of rain. Lights flickered on in the hallway as she climbed the stairs slowly. Each step echoed like a heartbeat. She stopped in front of the door marked 5B. Her hand hovered over the buzzer, her heart pounding with excitement and fear. This was it. The end of her search. The beginning of something new. But across the street, hidden high on a rooftop, a pair of glowing red lenses focused on her. A small transmitter clicked softly, sending a message into the unknown. The first door evening settled over the city like a slow-moving shadow. The streets below glimmered with neon signs, hover lights in the faint hum of traffic. Princess Lyra stood before the door marked 5B, her hand hovering just inches from the buzzer. Her heart thudded in her chest, a mix of hope and fear twisting together. This was the door that separated years of memory from the truth waiting on the other side. She pressed the buzzer. A soft chime echoed inside. Then silence. She waited, pressed again, still nothing. The hallway was quiet but not peaceful. It was the kind of silence that held its breath before something happened. Lyra glanced down the stairwell. Shadows stretched long under the dim corridor lights. A metallic clang echoed faintly from the alley below. Her senses sharpened, picking up the faint hum of energy weapons. She stepped back from the door, scanning the walls and windows. The hair on the back of her neck lifted. Danger was near. Then the first blast came, a sharp hiss followed by a streak of blue energy cutting across the stairwell wall. The concrete sizzled and cracked. 3 figures moved swiftly through the alley, faces covered by black masks and glowing visors. Their formation was clean, military, not random thugs. They advanced toward the building like shadows with purpose. Lyra ducked low, pulling a slim metal rod from inside her coat. With a single flick, it expanded into a glowing staff, its edges shimmering like trapped starlight. She tapped her bracelet and a transparent shield wrapped around her like a soft moonlit shell. The attackers burst through the entrance, their boots silent, their weapons humming with charged power. One swung a plasma blade toward her. She spun her staff and blocked. Sparks exploded in the hallway, lighting the stairwell in flashes of blue and white. Another fired a stun charge that splashed against her shield like liquid lightning. She leapt sideways, moving with graceful precision, fighting in tight spaces with every motion calculated. But there were too many of them. 2 more figures came in from behind, cutting off her escape. Lyra's shield shimmered under the pressure. Her shoulder burned from a near miss. The attackers closed in, their visors glowing brighter. Just as one raised his weapon for a final strike, a strong voice cut through the chaos. "Get down!" the voice shouted from above. Lyra twisted her head upward. At the top of the stairwell stood a man in a worn jacket. Stand steady like someone who had faced danger before. In his hands was a compact plasma rifle, modified and well-maintained. He squeezed the trigger without hesitation. A sharp beam of blue light cracked through the air, striking the nearest mercenary's weapon and sending it skidding across the floor. Another shot followed, perfectly aimed, forcing the attackers to dive for cover. Lyra didn't hesitate. She dashed up the stairs as the man covered her with precise, controlled bursts. Her staff whirled, knocking aside another blast as she moved. The attackers tried to regroup, but his aim broke their rhythm, pinning them in the stairwell. When she reached the landing, he reached out and grabbed her hand, pulling her through an open door. They slammed it shut behind them just as 2 plasma bolts struck the metal, leaving smoking dents inside the small apartment. The noise of battle faded into heavy silence. Lyra turned to face the man. He was taller than she remembered, his hair a little longer, his jaw sharper, but those eyes, calm and steady, had not changed. "You've grown," he said softly. Lowering the rifle, Lyra's breath caught, her heart beating wildly. "And you still saved me," she whispered. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The years between them hung heavy like dust in a still room. Outside, footsteps echoed down the stairwell, then faded as the mercenaries retreated into the night. Ethan leaned the rifle against the wall and checked the lock on the door. "You shouldn't be here," he said, voice low but firm. Lyra tilted her head slightly, studying him. "You knew I arrived." "I knew someone unusual was looking for me," he admitted. "Your trail wasn't exactly hidden." Despite the danger, a small smile touched her lips. "I hoped you would remember me." Ethan's eyes softened, recognition finally breaking through his guarded look. "I remember a little girl in a burning ship," he said quietly. I remember her eyes. The room was small and smelled faintly of machine oil and ozone. A single cracked window let in dim city light, painting the walls in shifting blue and gold. Lyra sat on a worn couch, folding her long coat neatly beside her. Her injured shoulder throbbed softly beneath her clothing. Ethan moved around the room with practiced ease, checking power lines and windows. "You brought trouble with you," he said. Not unkindly, Lyra's eyes followed him. "I didn't bring it, it followed me," she replied calmly. She explained in few quiet words how she had returned without royal permission, how factions in her world wanted her controlled or erased. Ethan listened, jaw tightening, the reality of her presence settling like a weight on his shoulders. Outside, somewhere in the distance, a drone whirred past, scanning buildings with cold precision inside. Their reunion carried both warmth and a sharp edge of danger. Two lives joined once by chance were now tangled again by something far bigger than either of them. Lyra leaned forward slightly. "I came to find you, Ethan," she said softly. Not to hide, Ethan looked at her, his eyes steady like they were that night long ago. "Then you found me," he replied. Neither of them noticed the small surveillance drone hovering silently, just outside the cracked window, its red light blinking as it transmitted their location to someone unseen. The hidden past night wrapped around the city like a heavy cloak. Inside Ethan's small workshop apartment, the air was thick with quiet tension. The faint hum of streetlights outside mixed with the soft ticking of old machines resting in the corners. Ethan leaned the plasma rifle against the door and checked the locks again, his movements sharp and careful. Lyra sat upright on the worn couch, her long coat folded beside her. The glow in her violet eyes dimmed but alert. She had finally found him, but her arrival had also awakened forces that had been waiting in silence. Ethan moved to a small workbench cluttered with tools and half-repaired drones. He pulled open a hidden drawer and took out a small metallic sphere, twisting it until it emitted a faint pulse. A privacy field shimmered around the room, blocking scanners and signals. Only then did he turn back to her, his face calm but serious. "You need to tell me everything," he said. His voice low but firm. Lyra met his gaze without flinching. "I came to Earth without permission," she began slowly. "There are people in my world who would rather erase the past than let me honor it." She explained how the Royal Council of Orion had warned her against returning. They saw Earth as unstable, weak, a world to observe but never to bond with. Her journey had broken their laws, and worse, it had drawn the attention of factions who wanted to control her, or silence her forever. Ethan listened, his hands tightening on the edge of the workbench. "So they sent people after you," he said quietly. More a statement than a question. Lyra nodded. "They followed me here the moment I landed, and now they know I found you." Ethan paced slowly, the weight of her words pressing down like a growing storm. "I always wondered if that night was real," he admitted, his eyes distant. "I told no one. Who would believe a boy pulling an alien princess out of a burning ship?" Lyra smiled faintly. "It was real, and you changed my life," she said softly. Her words hung in the air, warm but edged with the danger closing in from outside. She looked at the plasma rifle leaning against the wall. "This weapon," she said, standing and walking closer. "Where did you get it?" Ethan frowned slightly. "I salvaged it years ago from the crash site. It was broken. I fixed it." Lyra's eyes narrowed. She tapped her bracelet and scanned the rifle. A soft pulse of light ran over its surface, and a strange symbol appeared briefly. Her expression changed, serious and sharp. "This isn't just a weapon," she whispered. "It's marked with a royal beacon." Ethan looked confused. "A beacon?" Lyra nodded slowly. "A tracking signature built into royal tech, hidden deep. It's how they found us." The realization hit both of them at once. They hadn't just stumbled into danger. They had been leading it here for years, unknowingly. Ethan had kept the beacon alive every time he maintained the weapon. Lyra moved quickly, opening a small panel in the rifle's stock and revealing a glowing crystal buried inside. "This transmits across light years," she said. "They've known exactly where you are." Ethan's jaw tightened. "So they were never just chasing you. They were watching me too." Lyra nodded. "You saved me once, and it made you part of something much bigger than Earth." The air in the room grew heavier. Outside, faint drone sounds passed through the night. Circling like silent vultures, Ethan reached into another drawer and pulled out a small jammer. Setting it near the window, he moved with quiet precision, his instincts sharpened by years of living unnoticed. "Can you disable the beacon?" he asked. Lyra examined the glowing crystal closely. I can't destroy it without triggering a signal, but I can mask it for a short time, she said. She pulled out a thin blade and made delicate cuts into the casing. Sparks flickered softly. Finally, the glow dimmed to a low pulse, like a heartbeat fading into sleep. For now, she said, they won't track us directly, but they're already close. Ethan sat down opposite her, their eyes meeting across the dim room. You left everything to come back here, he said slowly. Why? Lyra's voice softened. Because that night you ran toward fire when everyone else ran away. You carried me out of the dark, and I swore I would find you again. Her words carried a weight that went beyond gratitude, something deeper, unspoken. For a moment, the noise of the city faded, and only their shared memory filled the silence. Then a sudden flicker cut through the privacy field. The walls seemed to hum with static, a cold vibration crawling through the air. Lyra's bracelet flashed red. They're scanning the building, she whispered. Ethan sprang up, shutting off the lights and grabbing his rifle. Lyra moved beside him, her staff collapsing into its compact form, ready in her hand. They both stared at the window as a faint blue light swept across it like a search beam. A second later, the drone passed by, its sensors lingering too long. They're here, Ethan said under his breath. Lyra glanced at him, a silent agreement passing between them. Whatever their past had been, their future was now tied together, and the enemy was no longer far away. The siege, the night outside, had turned colder, the wind carrying a low metallic hum through the narrow streets. Ethan and Lyra stood in the darkened apartment, their eyes fixed on the window where the blue scanning light had just passed. For a moment everything went still, like the city itself was holding its breath. Then a low rumble rolled through the air, followed by the sharp whine of engines. Lyra moved to the window and peered through a thin gap in the curtain. Her violet eyes reflected the sight outside, and what she saw made her heart tighten. At the far end of the street, two black armored vehicles glided in silently, their wheels hovering inches above the ground above them. A formation of small drones zipped through the air, forming a loose circle around the building. Their lights blinked like cold stars, scanning every surface with precision. On the rooftops nearby, dark silhouettes appeared one by one, snipers and soldiers moving with silent discipline. They're surrounding the building, Lyra whispered, her voice calm but sharp. Ethan checked the power charge on his plasma rifle, the soft hum of its core filling the room. They're not just scouting, he said quietly. This is a full strike. He moved quickly to his workbench, opening a hidden compartment underneath. Inside were old tools, parts, and a few dangerous surprises he had built over the years. Lyra watched as he pulled out small magnetic spheres, setting them along the walls like traps. You've been preparing, she said softly. I fix machines for a living, Ethan replied, but I don't like being unprepared. Lyra's hand rested briefly on her staff. Then she stepped beside him, their movements falling into an unspoken rhythm. For the first time since she landed, they were not strangers chasing memories. They were allies standing against the storm. Outside, a drone descended lower, projecting a cold voice through the night air. Open the door and surrender the Princess of Orion, it declared. Failure to comply will result in elimination. Lyra's jaw tightened. They're not giving us a choice, she whispered. Ethan flipped a switch on his jammer, causing the drone's voice to break into static. He looked at her, his eyes steady and clear. Then we make our own choice, he said. She nodded slowly, a spark of trust lighting between them. The first blast hit the front door like thunder, shaking the walls and sending dust down from the ceiling. Blue light flooded the hallway as soldiers moved in with precise formation. Lyra sprang forward, activating her energy shield and blocking the first wave of plasma fire. Her staff spun through the air like a streak of silver light, knocking one attacker back through the door. Ethan crouched behind a table he had turned into a barricade, firing controlled bursts that struck drones out of the air one by one. Sparks flew as two of his magnetic traps detonated near the entrance, creating a wave of smoke and shrapnel that forced the soldiers to scatter. But more kept coming, rappelling down the side walls, entering through windows, surrounding them from every angle. Lyra moved like flowing water, striking, blocking, spinning through the narrow rooms with precision. Ethan rewired one of his old service drones mid-battle, ripping out its safety locks and turning it into a flying explosive. He shoved it through a broken window, and seconds later, a bright flash lit the night as it collided with the shield generator mounted on the armored vehicle outside. The enemy's outer barrier flickered and collapsed, the formation breaking for the first time. They felt that, Ethan muttered under his breath. Reloading with practiced speed, Lyra landed beside him, her shield pulsing with energy. A small cut on her cheek glowing faintly in the light. They're adapting, she warned. They'll push harder now. As if answering her, the drones switched tactics, releasing pulse grenades that shook the apartment like rolling thunder. The walls cracked, lights flickered, and part of the ceiling caved in through the chaos. Ethan grabbed Lyra's hand and pulled her toward the back hallway. There's an old maintenance tunnel, he said. We can escape through it. Lyra hesitated for only a heartbeat, then nodded, covering him as he opened a hidden panel in the floor. They slipped inside just as another wave of soldiers stormed the main room, their boots pounding against the metal floor. The tunnel was narrow, dark, and smelled of old machines and rust. Their footsteps echoed softly as they moved deeper into the underground maze. Above them, the battle still raged, muffled like distant thunder. For a brief moment, there was quiet between them, the adrenaline slowly giving way to a strange stillness. Lyra looked at Ethan, his face lit only by the dim blue light of her bracelet. You didn't run, she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. Ethan gave a faint half smile. I ran once, he replied, toward the fire. Her eyes softened, a warmth blooming beneath the urgency. For years she had imagined their reunion, but not like this, not side by side in a war neither of them asked for. They reached a fork in the tunnel. Lyra stopped, her senses alert. She closed her eyes and listened. The air carried a faint vibration like distant engines. They're not just after us, she whispered. They brought something bigger. Ethan tilted his head, hearing it too, a deep rhythmic pulse rising from the surface. Lyra's bracelet flickered with incoming signals, encrypted but strong. They called reinforcements, she said, opening her eyes. Ethan tightened his grip on the rifle, his jaw set. Then we keep moving. They disappeared deeper into the tunnels as the enemy closed in behind them. Above ground, more ships descended through the night sky, their lights piercing the clouds like silent predators. The siege was far from over, it had only just begun. The Council's shadow. The tunnels twisted like the veins of an old forgotten city. Ethan and Lyra moved through the narrow passage with careful steps, the dim blue light from her bracelet guiding the way. Above them, the distant echoes of engines rumbled like thunder, shaking loose bits of rust from the ceiling. The enemy was still searching, but down here they had a small lead. Ethan's breathing was steady, focused, his rifle ready in his hands. Lyra walked slightly ahead, her senses tuned like an instrument, listening for any hint of danger. After what felt like endless turns, they reached a heavy steel door marked with faded warning signs. Ethan knelt, pried open an old panel and rewired the locking system with swift, practiced movements. With a soft hiss, the door slid open, revealing a wide underground chamber filled with flickering lights and scattered equipment. The air smelled of oil and old circuits. Lyra stepped in carefully, scanning the room. Ethan followed. Closing the door behind them, hidden deep beneath the city was a forgotten maintenance hub, now repurposed into something else entirely. As they moved deeper, figures stepped out from the shadows. Men and women dressed in worn jackets and scavenged armor raised their weapons cautiously. Human resistance, Lyra whispered under her breath. A tall woman with short silver hair stepped forward, lowering her weapon slowly, her eyes sharp and intelligent. You brought company, she said to Ethan. And not the usual kind, Ethan nodded. She's not an enemy, he replied simply. The woman studied Lyra for a long moment, taking in her glowing violet eyes and quiet poise. Then she nodded once. Then she'd better explain fast. They gathered around a long metal table lit by a single hanging light. Lyra stood at the head, her posture calm but her voice carrying quiet authority. I am Princess Lyra of the Orion Star Realms, she said. Murmurs spread through the group. A few lowered their weapons completely. Others exchanged uneasy glances. I came here not to conquer, but to fulfill a promise, she continued, and to reveal something your world has not been told. Her words held the weight of secrets long buried. She explained how the Orion Council had kept Earth under silent watch for decades. They observed every technological move, every war, every fragile alliance. To most of Orion, Earth was seen as a minor world, chaotic and dangerous, unworthy of deep ties. But factions inside the Council saw an opportunity. They wanted to use Earth as a pawn in their political power struggles, to turn the planet into leverage in a galactic conflict. Lyra's voice grew sharper. My return was not just disobedience. It was defiance against those who would chain two worlds together without their consent. Ethan listened quietly, his expression hardening with every word. He had lived his entire life unaware that his planet was a silent piece on someone else's board. The resistance members leaned forward, absorbing every detail. One man asked, "Why you?" "Why now?" Lyra met his eyes. "Because years ago, one human changed everything," she said softly, glancing toward Ethan. "He risked his life for someone he did not know, and in doing so he became a symbol inside Orion." Though they tried to bury it, Ethan shifted slightly, uncomfortable under the weight of her words. "I didn't do anything special," he said quietly. Lyra shook her head slowly. "You did what no one else did. You ran toward the fire," she replied. Her words carried warmth and power, echoing through the chamber like a quiet truth. Then the resistance leader tapped a console, bringing up a holographic projection. On it appeared images of the city above, drones in formation, and larger ships descending through the clouds. "They're deploying Council loyalists," she said. "If they find you, they'll crush this city to send a message." Ethan leaned closer. "How much time do we have?" "Not much," she replied. "Their reinforcements are moving fast." Lyra turned to the group, her voice steady but intense. "I have something the Council fears," she said. She reached into her coat and pulled out a small crystalline device, its inner light swirling like a storm contained in glass. "This contains records, transmissions, and Council decisions they've hidden from both our worlds," she explained. "With this, I can broadcast the truth to Orion and Earth at the same time." The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling like stone. Ethan stepped forward, his voice low but firm. "If you send this, they'll come for you with everything they have." Lyra met his gaze. "They already have," she said. He nodded slowly, understanding without needing more words. The resistance leader leaned back, a faint smile forming. "Then let's make them listen," she said. They began working quickly, connecting the crystal to the old resistance transmitters, rerouting power through forgotten lines. Ethan helped stabilize the network, his hands moving fast through tangled wires, his old skills flowing like muscle memory. Lyra stood at the center, ready to speak not just as a princess, but as someone about to challenge an empire. Then suddenly alarms blared through the chamber. Red lights flashed, and one of the scouts ran in breathless. "They found us," he shouted. "They're sealing the tunnels from both sides." The resistance members moved into position. Weapons ready, Ethan grabbed his rifle. Lyra tightened her grip on her staff. Above them, faint tremors signaled the approach of heavy landing craft. They exchanged a single look, not of fear, but of shared resolve. The shadow of the Council was here, and the next few minutes would decide everything. The declaration. The ground trembled as the Council's forces drew closer. From deep underground, the rumble of engines echoed through the tunnels like a rising storm. Red emergency lights flashed inside the resistance chamber, casting sharp shadows across determined faces. Lyra stood at the center of it all, the crystalline device glowing like a captured star in her hands. Ethan checked his rifle one last time, the hum of its core steady and calm. Around them, resistance fighters moved with silent urgency, sealing entrances, setting defenses, readying themselves for a fight they had never expected to face. "They've breached the southern tunnel," a scout shouted, his voice echoing through the chamber. The resistance leader barked orders. Fighters rushed to their positions. Lyra walked toward the old transmitter platform at the far end of the room, cables snaking across the floor like roots. She placed the crystal in the central node, and immediately the entire chamber lit up with shifting holograms. Images of Orion's Grand Council halls merged with Earth's city maps. Two worlds projected side by side.
"This is it," Lyra whispered. "Once I speak."
"There is no turning back." Ethan stepped beside her, his presence steady. "Then speak so they can't ignore you," he said, above ground. The night sky split with the arrival of heavy landing craft. Armored ships descended through the clouds, their lights piercing the darkness like the eyes of predators. Drones swarmed the air, circling the tower district as soldiers dropped onto rooftops, moving with cold precision. The city, unaware of the full scale, was slowly waking up, drawn to the strange lights spreading over the skyline. In the chamber, Lyra activated the transmitter. A shockwave of light pulsed upward through old tunnels, bursting through forgotten antennas on rooftops. Beams of blue energy shot into the sky, opening a network that reached both Earth and Orion simultaneously. Her image appeared like a beacon across hundreds of feeds, on Orion starships in Earth's scattered networks, on council monitors in civilian squares. Every eye turned toward her, every ear tuned to the sudden, unexpected broadcast. She raised her voice, calm and commanding, echoing through two worlds at once. "I am Princess Lyra of the Orion star realms," she began, her eyes glowing bright violet. "For years, the Council has watched this world from above, treating it as a pawn, not a people." Ethan stood beside her like a silent sentinel, his presence grounding her every word. "I returned to fulfill a promise," she continued, "to find the human who saved my life and to speak a truth the Council has buried." She lifted her hand toward Ethan. "This man as a boy ran toward fire when no one else did. He saved me when no reward waited for him. He represents the courage that exists beyond power and politics," she declared. "And today I name him Protector of Orion's honor." The words exploded across the networks like a shockwave. On Orion, council members stood frozen, some outraged, some silent, their screens filled with her face. On Earth, thousands of people began gathering near the Tower District, drawn by the broadcast, whispering to one another as the truth spilled into the open. Then, as if in answer, the ceiling above them shuddered violently. An explosion tore through one of the tunnels, sending dust and fire rolling into the chamber. Council soldiers stormed in from both sides, their armor gleaming, weapons raised. "Contact!" a resistance fighter yelled. The battle erupting in an instant. Lyra spun her staff, energy shield snapping to life as plasma bolts filled the air. Ethan moved beside her, firing precise bursts that struck drones out of the sky and disarmed soldiers before they could regroup. Resistance fighters poured return fire, turning the chamber into a whirlwind of light and sound. The Council forces pushed hard, determined to crush the rebellion before Lyra could finish her message. But the broadcast was still live, beaming every second of the battle across both worlds. Above ground, the gathered crowd began chanting, their voices echoing through the streets. The Council forces had expected silence, not unity. Humans started climbing rooftops. Resistance members opened hidden caches. Ordinary citizens began blocking streets with vehicles and machinery. The city itself rose like a sleeping giant awakened. In the chamber, Lyra fought with elegant precision, her staff moving like liquid light. Ethan used every ounce of human ingenuity, rerouting power lines mid-fight to overload enemy shields, turning their own technology against them. One soldier lunged toward Lyra, but Ethan intercepted, striking with the butt of his rifle and knocking the weapon aside. She glanced at him briefly, their eyes meeting amid the chaos, not as strangers, but as two who stood back to back against the impossible. A massive holographic projection filled the chamber suddenly. The Orion High Council envoy appeared above them, a tall figure draped in cold authority. "Princess Lyra," the envoy's voice boomed, "stand down. Your actions are treason." Lyra lifted her chin, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "My actions are truth," she replied. "And truth is not treason." She turned toward the live broadcast, her final words echoing across both worlds. "From this day forward, Earth will not be a pawn. It will be heard," she declared, "and humanity will stand as more than shadows under your watch." The envoy's image flickered with fury. But the damage was done. Billions had heard her words. Soldiers on both sides hesitated, the moral ground shifting beneath their feet. Council ships hovering above began receiving conflicting orders as Orion citizens flooded their networks with questions and outrage. In the chamber, the Council troops faltered, their unity cracking. The resistance pressed forward, overwhelming them with unexpected resolve. Ethan fired the final shot that shattered the control node of the invading squad, shutting down their drones and leaving silence in its wake. Lyra stepped forward onto the transmitter platform, breathing hard but standing tall. Her declaration had been made, and two worlds had heard it. She turned toward Ethan, her eyes soft but fierce. "That night you saved a child," she said quietly. "Today you helped save two worlds," Ethan exhaled slowly, the weight of their journey settling in. Above the city, council ships began to retreat, political firestorms igniting across Orion as Earth's people cheered below. But in the distant black of space, a shadowed fleet watched silently, their lights blinking like cold stars. The battle was over, but the war for truth had only just begun.